You're listening to Side Hustle Pro, the podcast that teaches you to build and grow your side hustle from passion project to profitable business. And I'm your host, Nicaila Matthews-Okome. So let's get started. Hey friends, hey, welcome back to the show. I am so excited for you to listen to today's episode. Listen and watch today's episode with Les Alfred. Les is an award-winning podcast host, speaker, and content creator. And for nearly a decade, Les has created inspiring, approachable wellness content, leveraging her expertise as a personal trainer, nutrition coach, and certified yoga instructor. As the host of Balanced Black Girl, a chart-topping weekly podcast, Les facilitates thoughtful interviews and insightful solo episodes exploring the various aspects of life that contribute to wellness. Balanced Black Girl covers everything from wellness to productivity to personal finance to self-care. Her mission is to help others create nourishing habits that help them create necessary space to live their best lives. I absolutely love this conversation for so many reasons. Number one, it is not often that I get to talk to a fellow podcaster who went from podcasting as a side hustle to now full-time podcaster and content creator. So it's so refreshing to hear Les's journey, to compare notes, and just to talk about what's working now for us as entrepreneurs, as podcasters. Her journey is so inspiring, the things that she did and the steps that she did to really make sure that she could replicate her income as a podcaster before taking the big leap. I hope this episode inspires you and helps you to see yet again that you don't have to be this huge risk taker to become an entrepreneur. So let's get right into it. Welcome to the Side Hustle Pro guest chair.
Nicaila, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
I can't tell you how excited I am to have you here in the guest chair. You're someone whose podcast I have listened to, so I have heard your journey going from side hustler to now full-time podcaster, and I don't know many people who have done this journey, so we had to have this conversation.
Absolutely. I think it's one that you and I both know very well.
Yes. So tell us a little bit now, how do you introduce yourself these days, by the way? Like, what do you say to people?
I usually tell people that I'm a podcast host and a creator.
And when you say that, what does that encompass for you these days?
Yeah, it means that I am chronically online.
Yes.
I consider myself having two different arms to my business. I have the podcast, which is a business in and of itself, where I'm putting out episodes every single week of long form content. And there's all the content around the podcast itself. And then there is the content of Les, which is more of my influencer content that is connected, but pretty separate. They're kind of two of their own different things. And so those are the two sides of my business that I'm always managing and juggling.
Yeah, very interesting. You're right. Especially when I see your TikTok, right? I'm like, oh, she is an influencer. I'm sure some of these people, like, they know you have a podcast, but they're following you less for your content, your point of view, your thoughts, and all of that to see what's going on in your life. So how do you juggle those two parts of yourself? Do you feel like they're becoming merged, one and the same, or does it require a different part of your brain for each?
I think it definitely requires a different part of my brain. It's interesting because for a long time, those two parts of my business kind of fed one another. So I started off as a blogger and kind of influencer before I got into podcasting. And I would use the money that I earned from like brand deals and stuff like that to fund the podcast in the early days. So it was like they were very closely connected at the beginning. And then when the podcast grew and became more of its own entity, it kind of just became its own thing. And so I have plenty of people who just listen to the podcast and don't follow me on social media at all. Or every week I'll have someone find a TikTok video and be like, oh, you're a Balanced Black Girl? Oh, I had no idea. And so there's like these two separate worlds, and it has been tricky to manage both the longer I'm doing it, but it works for now.
So now let's talk about your journey here as a full-time podcaster and creator. This is the first year, right, where you have actually gone full-time. This is no longer your side hustle. So tell us, what was your career path before this?
Oh man, so many different things. I actually started my career off in aerospace finance, which could not be more different than what I'm doing now.
Yeah. Wow. That is it seems very niche. Did you study to do that? Like, how did you land there?
So when I was younger, I actually always wanted to be a journalist. That was what I wanted to be when I grew up. And I got to college intending to be a communications major. And then I learned that journalists don't really make a lot of money. And I was like, oh, I just took out all these loans. I'm going to
Yep,
need
yep.
to pay them back.
Mhm.
And that was also during the time of like the Great Recession, and the media
Yes.
industry was going through a lot. Things were really starting to transition to digital. And I was like, okay,
Mhm.
maybe journalism isn't a good career. And I just thought,
Mhm.
what could I get a job doing that's going to make money? And I thought business, finance. So I ended up switching to be a business major, communications minor. And I just went finance because I knew, big companies were hiring. And that was just kind of the route I went. I was just thinking money, pay off
Money.
my loans, have a job
Yes.
after graduation. And so I
It's
ended up getting
real.
hired to work in finance for a few years. And then when I was in corporate, I thought, okay, I still really want to do the communications, creating media work. Maybe I could switch to corporate communications, and maybe that'll be like a little bit closer to what I want to do. And so I transitioned from finance to corporate communications. And it was, it was less boring than finance, but it was
Yeah.
still very corporate. And during that time, I just started getting really into wellness, and I was really obsessed with wellness blogs. And after so many years reading so many blogs, I was like, I could do this.
Hmm.
And I started blogging on the side, and that ended up turning into kind of a tandem career that I had for a long time.
It's so interesting that you switched from finance to corporate communications because I know the transitional piece of that is a little tricky for some people. They're like, what skills do I share to move into a whole other division? How did you do that? Not that we're like trying to give corporate
Mm-hmm.
tips here, but
Yeah, for
I think it's
sure.
important
Yeah.
to address that. Yeah.
Absolutely. It was a couple of different things. So a lot of my work experience, prior internships and things were still in the communications space. So when I was in college, I worked in my school's office of communications
Okay.
and did a ton of writing. So I had a pretty robust portfolio of writing work that I had done because I had written for our school's alumni magazine all 4 years. So I had this big portfolio of writing. And then also when I was in the corporate space, I got a lot of mentors who were in the corporate communication space, and I would do extra projects. I would try to find a communications angle for all of the different work that I was doing and volunteer to do things that could help me kind of get more communications experience. And I was also really nosy when I was in corporate. And so when I knew I wanted to move into communications, I would just be looking at servers and share drives. And one day I stumbled upon some old sample writing tests that they would give people who applied for corporate communications jobs. And I would practice doing these writing tests. And a couple years later, when it was my turn to interview for a corporate communications job and I was taking the test they gave me was actually one of the samples that I had practiced on. So I
What?
was just hit the ground running. I was just ready. And so that was how I made the transition. A lot of sleuthing, having great mentors in the field that I wanted to be in, and just chipping
Wow.
away at it.
I'm so glad I asked that. See, I would have never known that. And I hope that helps somebody out there because, this is a season where a lot of people are trying to transition. So now let's get back into your journey from that. Now, I also heard you say in one of your episodes that you felt like you stayed in jobs after undergrad a little too long. So tell us about that. What do you mean by
I
that?
did, yeah. My first company where I had started in finance and moved into communications by the time I left, I was there for about 5 years. And that's a long time to be at a company. And looking back on it, I wish I would have left sooner, tried
Mm-hmm.
working at other companies and just tried doing other things. But, I was a first generation college student. I worked at a company that was seen as prestigious. And so I just thought, I'm just going to stay. Like that's kind of the messaging I got was like, you get a good job, you stay in it, you don't leave. And I just overstayed it. I wish I would have had a little bit more
Oh.
experience doing different things sooner.
So, as you were figuring out this content piece, what are some of the steps that you took to really start building out your blog and start building out your content side hustle?
Yeah, it took a long time. I mean, I started my first blog and creating content in 2014. And I didn't go full time with all of this until 2023. So it was a long, long road. And I was just constantly following my curiosity. I was constantly trying new things and testing different formats and experimenting to see what the audience responded to. And blogging led me to social media, which eventually led me to podcasting. And I found that I just hit a stride with podcasting that I hadn't really hit with blogging.
Yeah.
And so I decided to go all in on that.
Wow. Now, what led you to start a podcast?
Yeah, so I had been blogging for about 4 years at that point, and I knew that like my old blog and just the brand that I was creating just wasn't working. It had been 4 years of being really consistent. My numbers weren't getting better. I wasn't really feeling inspired by that work anymore. And so I stopped, and I thought that I was just going to stop creating content altogether, and just kind of walk away from it. And while I was away from it, I was getting messages from people who had followed me, and they said, "Hey, Les, I know you're taking a break right now, but when you're not posting, I don't see other Black girls talking about wellness in my feed. Like, I'm interested in, working out and healthy recipes and all these things. And I'm having a hard time finding people who look like me who are providing that kind of content." And so then I was like, okay, well, I don't want to be the one doing it. So maybe I can connect my audience or the people who are interested in this with other Black women in wellness who are doing similar things or doing different things who they can learn from. And I just at the time thought that a podcast would be the best way to do that. This was in 2018, so it was still kind of the earlier days of podcasting. And that I just got the idea, start a podcast, name it Balanced Black Girl, and I jumped in and did it. And I took the show from idea to launch in like 10 days.
What? I love that.
I immediately was like, if I don't create this show right now, someone else is going to, and I'm going to be devastated when I see them do it. So let me just do it right now. I didn't know anything about podcasting. I spent a lot of time on Google, a lot of time on YouTube, ordered a horrible microphone and just put it out there, and have been going ever since.
I love that. One thing you did, though, that I always just applaud you for is the name of your podcast. I just love it. This is what I teach people, like, just make it plain, you guys. You want people to find you or not.
Exactly.
Do you want your person to find you or not? Was that the name of your blog? If not, like, how did you come up with the name?
No, so my old blog name was The Balanced Berry, which people were always like, "Oh, is your last name Berry? Is it about fruit?" I was like, I don't know. I just like alliteration. I don't know. That's just what I named it. There was no real rhyme or reason. Right. I was interested in this concept of balance because I had loved wellness, but I'd also gone a little too far into wellness. I'd been exercising a little too much and restricting the food a little bit too much. And so I was interested in this idea of balance around, how can I take care of myself, but still live life and like be a well-rounded person. So I already had this through line of balance that was already what people kind of knew me for. And so I thought, how can I rebrand, but still have some sort of consistency? And so Balanced Black Girl seemed like a good natural evolution where it's like the name and kind of what it's about is very clear. People were used to me talking about balance and having balance in my brand name. And so it was just like a very natural kind of rebrand.
Love it. And what you cover is so important because oftentimes when people talk about wellness or fitness, quiet as it's kept, low key, there's a lot of addictive behavior going on. There's a lot of unhealthy behavior going on, restrictive, like you said, like overdoing it, exercising, running for hours at a time. And so that balance piece is so important.
Absolutely. That's like my whole mission.
So let's talk about how you start this podcast.
In
10 days. Where did you start recording?
So at the time, I was working for a startup. I was a social media manager at a startup. It was a small company based out of Seattle, where I was from. And I got the idea for the podcast while I was at work one day. So literally, I'm sitting at work, creating content for the company. I get this idea, start a podcast, name it Balanced Black Girl. I immediately go on Amazon. I order a microphone, and it was like the Snowball Yeti. Like I feel like everybody starts with this. Very 2018.
The Snowball or the Yeti. Very.
It was the time. And I bought the domain name for Balanced Black Girl. And I was like, okay, this is a great idea. And I went home and like started building out the website that night. And at the co-working space, we had these phone booths where people could go take calls if they didn't want to be out in the open space. So on the weekends, I would go in the phone booth and I would start recording the initial episodes of my podcast. So that was where I initially started the recording process.
Yes. You know what I find so funny about you two and I relate to is like we'll be talking and then you'll mention another job that you had.
I've had a lot of jobs. I've had so many
I'm
jobs.
like, oh, so you were a social media manager too.
I've done it
Okay, all
all.
right.
Yeah.
Because I relate. I've also done it all.
Yeah.
Now, once you started recording, were you also practicing marketing the show and getting it out there? What were your first steps in that terrain?
Yeah, I mean, thankfully, because I was a social media manager at the time, I was pretty well
Hmm.
versed in creating social media strategies because that was my job all
Yeah.
day. And so I just kind
Okay.
of applied what I was doing at my job to balance Black Girl. And I do
There
think in
you
the
go.
early days, Instagram was a really big part of how I really kicked off the show and got
Hmm.
an initial following out there. And also at the time, I was just doing a lot of like what was popular at the time. It was like a lot of
Yes.
memes, a lot of quotes. That was very much,
Hmm.
what people were very interested in, a lot of very shareable content. So people would be sharing the content and then see, okay, well, Balanced Black Girl, okay, what is that? And it just sparked a lot of initial curiosity about the platform. And I think that that's what really helped me get a kickstart at the beginning.
When did you start doing brand deals?
So I had started doing brand deals or working with brands, getting PR on social media, probably like 2016 or 2017 when I was kind of
Hmm.
more of a micro creator.
Okay, as a
And
creator. Got it.
yeah, as a creator. And then on the podcast, let's see, I started the show in October 2018. I want to say I got my first ads like in the spring of 2019. My first
Nice.
brand deal on the podcast was an ad for Black Girl Sunscreen. Um,
Ooh,
Great
yes.
brand. Yeah,
Love Shantae, love the brand. Yes.
I'd had Shantae on the podcast not long after I
Hmm.
started building a relationship with her. And I just pitched her, like, hey, how would you like to promote on our podcast? And so those were some of
Yeah.
the first ads that I ran. And I had kind of monetized and been running ads on the show off and on for the first couple of years. But it wasn't until early 2021 that I was consistently monetizing the podcast. So it took a couple
Mm.
years to get there consistently.
So when you started monetizing, were you proactively pitching outside of, proactively pitching Shantae? Were you proactively starting to pitch brands or did you see a lot of pitches come your way?
I was seeing more things come inbound. And at the time, I had wanted to do more pitching. I just didn't have a ton of bandwidth because I was still kind of working
Mm,
full time and keeping the show going. There was a period of time where I was doing 2 episodes a week instead of just one, which
yeah.
horrible mistake. I ended up scaling back to 1 episode a week where I was
Yeah.
biweekly for a long time because it was just a
Yeah.
lot to manage, especially before I
Mm,
had help and when I was editing on my
yeah.
own and, doing everything on my own. And so I just didn't really have the bandwidth to do as much pitching as I wanted. But because I was still kind of a micro creator on social,
Yeah.
I was still getting, a decent amount of inbound deals for social. And
Mm,
so if someone approached me about doing a brand deal on social, I'd be like, hey, I also have a podcast. Would you like to include podcast integration into this campaign? And so that's how I was able to get some initial monetization. Or if I was working with brands on an affiliate basis, I would create my
yeah.
own ads and like promote my affiliate codes to start getting the audience used to hearing
Got
ads, even
it.
though I
Yep.
technically, that wasn't like
Didn't
a
do a,
paid spot. And I would
yep.
get,
Yep.
some kickback from people using my affiliate code. So that's kind of what I was doing to prepare.
So then by 2021, now you said you started consistently monetizing. What shifted by 2021 for you to start doing that?
I think it was a couple of things. One, it was growth. The show had grown and had consistently
Mm,
been bringing in, a good amount of listens
yeah.
week after week. I also had signed with an agency, and they weren't a network because my show was still independent, but they were an agency that helped sell ad space for me. So at the time, I was still working in corporate. I still didn't have a ton of bandwidth to be doing a ton of pitching and managing those relationships on my own. So being able to
Yeah.
outsource that and get help was super helpful because then they had their sales team bringing in deals consistently.
Now, are you still working with that agency or have you moved all of that over to your network?
I've now moved it all over to my network. So last year I signed with a podcast network and they now manage my ad inventory on the show.
I love that. It's so interesting to hear other podcasters' journey in this space because, of course, there are things that are like overlap that I relate to, and then there's some unique experiences. Again, you're a creator and influencer background and experience, I think is so awesome. And I just love like seeing how you are able to merge those two worlds. Now, during this whole side hustle period, did you ever have the thought like, I just need to do this full time one day? This is what I want to be doing. Or were you still just trying to juggle both?
Oh, I wanted to be full time the entire time. I mean, what I had also left out when I started
Yeah.
blogging back in 2014 was like, I hated working in corporate. I hated it. And I was looking for a way out. And at the time, a lot of the blogger girls that I was following, they were going full time on their blogs and they were all blogging about how they were able to quit their jobs. And I was like, well, maybe if I quit or maybe if I start a blog, maybe eventually I can quit my job too. And
Yes.
so that was a big part of my why behind that, why I even started creating content to begin with, was I always wanted to leave corporate and go full time.
This is the perfect time to talk about one of the lessons. So Les has this episode. It's basically about the 35 things you learned by age 35. And listening to that, one of the ones that really stood out to me was, and you might, I don't want to butcher it, right? So it's essentially about everything you want is on the other side of being seen. Did I get that right? Like,
Yeah.
tell us what you mean
Hmm.
by that.
Absolutely. I think so many of us try to reach these big goals, and we think that we're going to reach our big goals by staying in our current comfort zone. And it's like the version of you that reaches that goal, her comfort zone
Yeah.
is way higher. Her threshold for risk and for putting herself out there is way higher than yours is right now. So you got to bridge that
Yep.
gap before you're going to get that thing.
Hmm. And I love that too, because it just resonated with me because I don't think any of us really start out in our career path thinking, all right, I want to be this person making content, sharing my life. And especially if you consider yourself a private person or an introvert, like this is not something that you intentionally put on a vision board, like at least not for me. But when I looked at what my goal was, I also had to look at, okay, well, who's doing that, right? So you had to look at who's doing this and what do they have to do. Now, please, because I don't want to get this is very delicate. I don't want to confuse you and make you think that in order to get something, you have to replicate exactly what someone else is doing. You have to find your sweet spot, of course. But if you want to make a life that doesn't require you staying in corporate or doing a traditional role, then you're going to have to do some non-traditional things and you're going to have to be seen.
Especially now, honestly. And I think,
Yeah.
content, and even business in a lot of ways has changed a lot where people want to know who's behind it. They want to feel like they know
Yeah.
you. They want to feel like you're their friend. They want to feel like they relate to you. We see that
Hmm.
criticism a lot with Beyonce, for example, and
Yep.
all of the entrepreneurial endeavors. She could come out
Hmm.
with the best product in the world, and people's biggest complaint is, well, we don't know her. She doesn't talk to us. She's not relatable.
Yeah.
And I'm like, she could be
Right.
serving you gold on a platter, but people are like, well, she's not relatable, so I'm not
Yeah.
buying. And I do think that that's been
Exactly.
a shift in how we consume over the past few years, probably especially since the pandemic, where I don't know if a decade ago people necessarily thought that way. I think previously people thought this is a good product. I like it. I'll buy
Yeah.
it. Now they need to like you and the
They
product.
need to
And that
like you
is
and the product.
hard.
And if they don't like you, it's a problem, right? We see that happen as well. And honestly, B just needs to come on one of our podcasts. So Yvette, marketing team, if you're listening,
Yes.
she don't just invite the influencers to the party. You need to come on a few of their podcasts. All
Yep.
right. I digress.
Yes.
Um, so, all right. How did you start to prepare to go full time with your
Yeah.
podcast?
I mean, a lot of it was around improving my relationship with money. So by the time it got to be around 2021, that was when I was like, okay, this podcast is really taking off. We have a very
Yeah.
dedicated audience. I'm really starting to see steady monetization that is beginning to
Yes.
match and exceed what I'm earning in corporate. So I really
Hmm.
think I've got something here, but I wanted to create a better foundation for myself before I made that jump. So I started working a
Yeah.
lot on my personal finances and just understanding personal finance a lot better was like my biggest
Yeah.
personal focus in the 2021. It was about 2 years for me to like really intentionally get to this point. And so, I started working on my relationship with money, unlearning a lot of beliefs around scarcity. I started paying more attention to
Mm.
my personal finances. I started budgeting and saving really heavily. I started getting really serious about paying off debt. And I really fortunate that I didn't have any sort of consumer debt, but I did have a lot of
Mhm.
student loans. And
Yeah.
I was like, okay, I graduated, 10 years ago. I'm tired of these. It's time to get it done. And I put together a very detailed plan for paying off my student loans. And I ended up paying them off in 2022. And I hired an accountant and got some better processes around how I manage my business finances and made myself an employee of my business and put myself on payroll and like really got my ducks in a row so
Oh,
that
that's awesome. Yeah.
I think I'm not that risky of a girl.
Yeah, me
I gotta
either.
keep it cute.
I
Where
need
it's
some
like,
things in place.
yeah, where they're
Yeah.
like, leap and the net will appear. No, no, no. I'm gonna put the net down. I'm gonna put the net down
Yeah.
and then I'm gonna
I
leap
need to
into
see
the net.
a little bit of net, a
I'm
little
gonna
bit of
see the
net.
net
Yeah.
while I'm on the ground, not while I'm in the
Right.
air. I was
Yeah.
like, I
Yeah.
gotta get myself together. I also wanted to see, okay, yes, the podcast is doing well, it's growing, I'm earning now. Can I do this again next year? Can I do this again next year?
Mm,
And then by the time I got to like my
yes.
third year of, continuing to bring in more revenue, I was like, okay, I have my stuff in order. I'm debt free. My savings are in a good place. My retirement is in a good place. I have all my systems in order. I feel like now is as good of a time as any. And so in December
Yes.
of 2023, that was when I left corporate.
Congratulations. I love that you talk about the personal finance piece. And, a lot of people say, oh, I got this and I hired this person, but you're like, no, I improved my relationship with money because now you are going to be in business for yourself, paying yourself, and there'll be fluctuations and you can no longer just rely on an automatic check every other week. So you really have to make sure that your relationship with money is tight.
Exactly.
And I got to be honest, like this is something that I'm continually learning as an entrepreneur because they're good years, they're more challenging years, and you really have to learn to be able to, it's kind of like an ocean. You got to be able to learn to swim through the waves. How has it been for you now as you've gone full time? How has your first year been?
There's been some waves. What's so funny is like
Yes.
literally I quit in December and
Uh-huh.
January was like my worst month ever. I
Oh,
made
no.
no dollars in January. I was getting no brand deals.
Oh, my God.
The
Wait, were you
podcast
on your
downloads,
network in January?
I was, but I had just gotten
Yeah.
on. And so it had taken
Yeah.
some time for like, the
Right.
money to roll over. And,
Yeah.
I was getting no brand deals. I had decided to leave the previous talent management agency that I was with, that I was
Uh-huh.
working with on social media deals. And I was trying to sign with new management and I kept getting rejected from
Ooh.
managers and agencies. And like, I was like, oh, I've been on the
Right.
upward for the past 3 years. And the second I quit, everything is, so Q1 was a little rough, but ever since then, I felt like I've been able to really find my groove. And thankfully, I had prepared very well
Yeah.
to weather, what was going on. And so I just kind of hung in there. But man, that first couple months, I was like,
You were like,
really?
was this the right decision?
I'm just like, really?
Yeah. January
Yeah.
2024 was that's such an interesting time to quit and be a full-time podcaster because of the shifts that happened with downloads
Yep.
dropping because of the iOS changes.
Yep.
Like, what a time, right? This has been
Listen,
such a crazy year.
I had just moved to New York City. It's like move to the most
Get
expensive city in the
out.
world, quit your
Oh, hello.
job, make no money. It was funny.
Girl, oh my God. We should have been talking offline. We could
I
have been
know.
moral supporting each other.
Thank
So,
you.
as you were side hustling, just to go back to the side hustle piece for a bit, your show was getting a lot of attention. So, was this ever an issue for you at work?
It did, and that was a big part of why I did ultimately leave. I always
Mm-hmm.
kept my corporate life and my content life
Yeah.
very separate. I would never talk about it at work.
Yes.
I would never talk about my job in my content. I just always kept them very separate. But over time,
Mm-hmm.
especially as the show started growing and getting more attention, it was harder to keep them separate. And I'd be getting Slack
Yes.
messages of like, I didn't realize that was your podcast. I've been listening to it, forever. Like you popped up
Oh,
on my For
wow.
You page, and I'm like, ooh. Oh no.
Oh
And it just
no.
got to the point where it became abundantly clear that I wasn't going to be
Yeah.
able to do both. And so that was why I
Yes.
ultimately decided to bet on myself.
bet on yourself. Yeah, I knew that had to be the case because it's like, all right, you are a star and there's no way they could not know about this. This year has been a lot of waves. You're on a network. What has been your experience now as a full-time podcaster in determining your revenue streams as you navigate these waves? I saw you just did a live show, for example. What are you currently doing for your revenue streams?
Yeah, so I would say right now I have a few different revenue streams. Podcast ads and social media partnerships are probably my two biggest revenue streams. I do also have a revenue stream for speaking engagements. So I've been getting more paid speaking opportunities, particularly this year when I'm not in corporate and I have the bandwidth to take on
Yes.
more speaking gigs and flexibility to do that. And that is one revenue stream that I would love to continue building out more. I also do have some digital products. I have some Notion templates, particularly for podcasters to help them keep their podcasts organized and streamlined. So for now, those are my primary revenue streams. I did just do my first live show in New York earlier this week, and the audience responded really well to that. We have people, asking for us to come to other cities. So I'm thinking about what that could look like for 2025. And I'm also thinking about other brands that I would want to get into. I would love to also eventually have a product that is not me as I get ready to move into like the next phase of my life. And so I'm thinking about what that could look like and working on some more fun projects there.
Right. Isn't that so interesting how you start out and there's phases to life. So you start out in a very visible, front-facing content creator, podcaster type of life and career. But the ultimate goal is to be able to sit back, relax, and not have to be on, so to speak, or have to show up to get paid.
Exactly. Yeah.
We'll work it out. We'll let y'all know that's the next phase. So phase 1, quit your job.
Yes, exactly. That's been, I think about it like in my decades, like my 30s have really been all about taking risks. I moved to LA at 30. I moved to New York at 34. I went full time at 34, and I plan on for the rest of my 30s really having fun with it, writing it out. And then in my 40s, I would love to transition to something a little bit more quiet, a little more private. I would love to do more investing in other companies. I would love to sit on some boards. I would love to write fiction. Like these are things that I'm really looking forward to in my next phase. And so now I'm just kind of bridging the gap between where I am now as a creator and figuring out how I'm going to get to that point.
Don't you just love that about the way, our generation and generations like between, I don't even know what generation I really am, but let's say like millennials plus Gen Z, right? Let's blend it together and say, don't you just love this for us? This idea, this notion of creating our life. Like we're literally writing these chapters and we're aware that we can do that. Of course, thankful to the sacrifices of our ancestors, but it is such a beautiful thing to have this perspective. And I hope that if you don't have this perspective, that this conversation is awakening that for you, that you are going to do different things in this life. And this is just different chapters in your journey,
Exactly.
And in this part of the conversation, I just want to be a motivating force for podcasters who are listening to this, whether you're aspiring or a current podcaster, because again, I know it's a different landscape than when I started, when Les started, and I know there's a lot more competition. It's a lot harder, but that doesn't mean that it's not still a really good thing to do. So I wanted to ask you, what do you think the benefit of starting a podcast is in 2024 and beyond?
Yeah, I think podcasting is just getting started. And I think a lot of people think that the podcast space is a lot more saturated than it really is. Like people say, oh, everybody has a podcast. I'm like, no, everybody doesn't. A lot of people they start a podcast, but do they continue a podcast? They realize how much work it is and then they don't continue. And I think so much of the success of shows like ours is like we kept showing up and we kept doing it when other people wouldn't. It is a long game. And so be prepared for a long game. It's not like TikTok or like YouTube where you have an algorithm helping you, but if you show up, your people will show up for you. So make sure you're doing it as part of a long game, not a short game.
Yes. And also the benefits will show up as well.
Yeah,
And I think if you're just shouting into the void and you're not researching, okay, what lane do I want to play in? Do I want to go in the lane of getting ads on my show? Do I want to go in the lane of using my podcast as kind of like a resume that gets me speaking gigs and a book deal? So you also have to realize what your money lane is going to be in this game to start seeing the benefits and start working that money lane.
love that. Yeah, like have a why. Know
Yeah.
where you want it to take you.
Yes, because how else can you see the rewards if you don't even know what rewards you want? And that's another thing I heard you mention in your episode on the 35 things you've learned since 35. It was something along the lines of we can change the reality, right? So I think you talked about people going on trips and you might see people on social media and be like jealous, like, how are they in Paris for the Olympics? And you're like, why don't you, instead of being jealous of them, which jealousy is not always a bad thing if it can motivate you, but then take that motivation and start making a plan of how you're going to get to Paris next summer. And that's what you did, right? Tell us that story because I
Yeah,
think it's so
yeah.
phenomenal.
It was, in the summer of 2021 when that first wave of vaccines hit, and it seemed like everybody was in Tulum and everybody was in Italy.
Everybody
And
was in
meanwhile,
Tulum.
I was in LA on my couch, deep in the middle of
Yep.
my like student loan repayment, repair my relationship with money process. And I was
Mm-hmm.
like, now, wait a minute. What pot of gold did everybody find that I didn't find? And I definitely felt that bit of jealousy. And I thought, well,
Yeah.
if you want your Euro summer, take out a pen,
Mm-hmm.
take out a piece of paper, price it out,
Yes.
figure out how much it
Yes.
costs, start
Yep.
planning, start saving. And I did. And it took about 2 years. I wasn't able to take my trip or have my Euro summer
Mm-hmm.
until the summer of 2023, because that's how long it took me to save and pay off my loans and feel comfortable doing it, get the time off work and everything. But I did it. And other
Yeah.
people watching who didn't know what I was doing behind the scenes, didn't know that I'd spent 2 years planning and saving and making that happen, probably thought, well, Les just gets everything. And somebody paid for that trip for her. And
Yep.
she's
Yep.
so
She's
this
so
and that.
lucky. Yeah.
She's so privileged. She's so this and that. And I do absolutely have a lot of privilege, which I don't deny, but sometimes we come up with these excuses as to why things are easier for other people and harder for us. And that
Mm-hmm.
can be very real, but we also do have a lot of power to make things happen. And sometimes it takes a little
Yeah.
longer than, it
Yep.
took me 2 years to have my little Euro summer, 2 years after
Yep.
everybody else did it. But it was still mine and it was my experience to have. And I'm so grateful
Yes.
for it. And so oftentimes, if we take some of that energy that we have towards, well, how did other people do it? And put it towards, well, how can I do it? What does my version of that
How
look
can
like? We
I
could get a
do
lot
it?
further.
Yes. I always like to say delayed gratification is still gratifying.
Yeah.
Delay is not denial. So, how can I do it? What a reframe. What a reframe. Now, oh, how is she getting that? How is she doing this? How can I do it? And you know what else? Don't be afraid to reach out to people and just ask. That's why I
Hmm.
started a podcast. Like, how are you doing this? You know?
Oh, yeah.
Get the behind the scenes.
People ask me for podcasting advice all the time, and I'm like, be nosy.
Yes.
Channel is glory. This is a safe space to be nosy.
AKA inquisitive. So, what's been your financial experience? First year entrepreneur, first year full time podcaster and creator. Like, how has it been on the finance side?
It's been solid. I made a joke at my live show the other night that like my measure of success is like, can I pay my rent? And it'll be
Yeah.
almost 12 times paying my rent since I've been full time. And I consider that a success,
Yes.
especially in New York. I'm
Yes.
like, that's
Yeah.
all I need. And so, I've figured it out. I've definitely gotten scrappy at times, but I'm still here. I have not needed to go back to corporate. I'm still moving through and I'm grateful for
Yeah.
it for sure.
And what kind of team have you built at this point in the game?
Yeah, I have a lean team. I love a lean team. I was talking to
Me
somebody about this
too.
last night. I don't want to
Yeah.
be managing dozens of people. I also had people management experience in corporate, which was so helpful because then I got to learn how to manage people on my former company's dime. And now for my team, I know how to manage them. And I learned a lot of lessons already in a safe corporate space.
Yeah.
But I have a pretty lean team. So with my podcast network, I do have a lot of support there. So with
Okay.
them, I have a dedicated producer. I do have their ads team who helps negotiate my ad deals. And so they manage like the audio editing of my show, making sure it's scheduled and things like that are handled in-house at my network. And then on my
Great.
team, I have a podcast manager who helps me just run the logistics of the podcast. So she's helping me book guests. She's communicating with my network manager to make sure all of our edits are done correctly. You know, she's submitting our show notes. She's communicating with our video editor to make sure our YouTube videos go up on time and are happening correctly. I do have an editor who helps me with the full video versions of the podcast episodes, as well as some folks who help me cut clips for social promos. And then I also have a manager who I work with who helps me with my brand deals on the social media side, as well as my speaking opportunities. And so that's my team. Everybody has their specialty, and working with people who have like a tight statement of work, but are very good at what they do, I've found is how I like to work.
Yes. And are those like full-time team members or contractors?
Contractors.
Okay, same here. Now, I noticed that a lot of your episodes are live, like in studio kind of things. When did you start doing video and inside of a studio? And do you continue to do all of them that way now?
Yeah, I started going in studio to record in the spring of 2023, and I was still independent at the time. So I was paying money to do that. Thankfully, now that I'm in network, I get support with that. And so it's made it easier to be even more consistent with it. But I have noticed that it has changed the tone of the podcast a bit. You know, when I was recording at home and it was all virtual, I would often have my notes in front of me and I would be, you know, verbatim asking the same, not asking the same questions, but like asking the questions exactly as I prepared them, versus now speaking with people in person, I might ask maybe 50% of the questions that I prepared. And then the other 50% of the conversation is just natural, like riffing, because it's so much easier to kind of do that in person. And so, yeah, we do predominantly do in-person interviews. We'll do the occasional virtual, but we really try to do in-person as much as possible.
How do you think, in addition to the conversations, the nature of the conversations, how has that changed and impacted your show's growth across not only podcast platforms, but social media as well?
It's definitely helped, because I think the video content or the video quality is a little bit, it just creates a little bit more visual interest when people are in a space speaking with one another in person. And so I do think it's let us be a little bit more creative on the social side and play with promotional clips in certain ways. I do think that the audience tends to stop their scroll a little bit quicker for things that are in person. And so it's definitely, I think, helped our social growth for sure.
And do you find that those clips are converting people over to the long form content? Are you measuring that, or right now it's more of a brand awareness play for you?
I would say it's a mix. It depends on the clip and it depends on how the clip performs. I would say if I have a clip that is from a solo episode that does well on social media, we usually do see a bit more conversion of people going to the longer form episode to check it out. If we have a clip that is of an interview that goes viral, we don't see as much conversion because people are kind of interested in that one moment and we don't see as much moving through. But also with that, so since I've been doing the in-studio episodes, that was when I started being more consistent on YouTube. And so we have seen good growth of people being interested in the show on YouTube. But what's interesting is that even more so than the social clips going viral leading to conversions, I tend to see more spikes in conversions when my own influencer content does well. I tend to see people convert over to the podcast more than if we have a clip that does well, which is super interesting.
But, you know, I think it makes sense because the thing about podcasting is it's such an intimate medium and people, they have to like you to listen to your show. You're not going to listen to someone you can't stand, who you find annoying. So if I resonate with the person and it's like, oh, you have a podcast, and it's not like your content is completely vastly different from what your podcast is about too. So it's like, oh, I can get even more in-depth conversation about this. And I feel like my friend is talking to me. Like, Yes. So
Exactly.
I that makes sense to me. But I wanted to ask that, especially, for the podcasters out there, because it's something that we're all still measuring, right? Video has really like put the fire on us, like make this content, make this content. But then how do you make the most of this content? Because it's expensive to have a video editor and to make all these snippets, right? So that's what we're all figuring out right now.
Exactly. Yeah. One other thing I'll also say is I have noticed when we've had, clips from the podcast do really well on social and we see that spike, we usually tend to see that spike convert more on YouTube as opposed to the
Mm.
audio only version. So if someone
Right,
sees a
right.
video clip and it like piques their interest, they don't usually then go to Spotify or go to Apple Podcasts. They'll usually
Exactly.
like go to YouTube because they want to watch the whole thing, which has also been just interesting because I'm such an old school podcast girly that I'm an audio
Yes.
only podcast
I
listener
was
till
like
the
that for a
end.
while. Yeah. I was like that for a while. I think I was a little bit just in denial. I was like, oh
Yeah,
no,
same.
podcasts are audio.
Yeah, yeah,
And then 2022 to 2024, like things have just shifted. And now YouTube has outpaced these other platforms. So
hmm
you got to get in with the video and you have to do it in a way that makes sense for you. Cause like you mentioned, studio time can be quite pricey, but you can find ways to make it work. So now that you've done the live show, I'm curious, going into 2025, are you planning to do more experiences like that as part of your business?
a good question. I mean, what's funny about this live show is it was an experiment and I learned a lot from it. I thought, well,
Yeah.
I mean, I'll be honest, I don't love planning events. So I don't ever want events to be the bread and butter for my business. I see it as
Yeah.
like a little surprise and delight or a nice bonus for the audience. But I don't know if I ever see myself being somebody who is always doing events because I just
Mhm.
don't like events that much. I mean, if I could be, I'm an introvert. I didn't even
Yeah.
want to be on
Yeah.
video. I started a podcast because I wanted to talk in my closet, and now
Exactly.
it's
Same.
gotten out of
Same. We
hand.
are one. Yep.
Yeah. But I definitely think, over the next few years, having some kind of
Mhm.
surprise and delight moments. What was interesting about the live show is I definitely undersold it. I thought, well, I don't
Mhm.
really do events. I don't know if people will want to come. Let's just do something
Yes.
small, something intimate.
Hmm.
Hopefully people will come. And the audience
Yeah.
sold it out 3 weeks before the show. And we had a wait list that could have been a
I
whole nother
love
show. We just
that. I
timing
love
wise weren't
that.
able to make the second show work. So I'm
Yeah.
like, okay, lesson learned. The audience does want this. We need bigger
Hmm.
venues and to not sell myself and the show short. Lesson
No, you
learned.
cannot sell yourself short at all. And so, do you have an email list? I'm assuming you do, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, once you put it out to that email list, it's like
That's what it was. I barely even
sold.
promoted it. I had put it in
Yeah.
my newsletter
Yeah,
for a
I
couple
didn't know it
weeks
was
and it sold
happening. I
out.
would have come. I'm in New York. When I saw you post on LinkedIn,
Yeah.
I'm like, wait, I
I
didn't
didn't
know.
even get to tell people about it because they sold it out before I could tell anybody about it.
Right. And you don't want to disappoint people then after that when there are no
Right. Because
tickets,
then I
right?
was getting people emailing me and DMing me and they were
Yeah.
upset and I was like, well, I don't want to talk about it too much
Yeah.
because people can't
Right.
come. I learned a lot.
Well, I think you got to make events a little bit bigger in your business. It doesn't have to be everything, but yeah, because I can just see the partnership opportunities, right? Like imagine some kind of activation fused with the podcast. The potential is endless. So before we transition to the lightning round, let's talk about the email list piece for a bit because you're someone who you've really done a great job of building out a substantial following on a few different social media platforms. But we all know the power of that email list, right? You send out an email, you sell actual tickets. Like it's not just people liking your post and not taking action. So what has been most helpful for you in getting people from the social platforms onto your email list?
Yeah, I haven't done this in a while. It's reminding me that I need to get back to this, but I would have kind of content integrations with the
Mm.
podcast to get people on my email list. So a few years ago for the new year, I had a really successful series on the podcast, some of our highest downloads ever, called Reframing
Yeah.
the Reset, which was kind of like our New Year's wellness
Ooh,
refresh. And with that, I had a whole
yes.
challenge and people could opt in for, worksheets that I created in Notion to help supplement what
Ooh.
they'd learned on the podcast each week and things
Mm-hmm.
like that definitely helped grow my email list.
Yes.
So it's been a lot of like incentivizing people, doing
Mm-hmm.
templates, doing freebies, things to help people apply what they learn on the podcast have been
Yes.
really helpful.
Yes.
And I haven't done anything like that in a while, but things of that nature has been super helpful for helping me grow the list.
Yes, y'all take that tip. I love a freebie. I love an
Mhm.
integration. And you know what I really love too? I want to do another one soon is a challenge. Like
Yes.
a social media challenge. That was one of my first big things and that really helped grow the list. So podcasters out there also think about what kind of activity group thing that you can do and really grow that list. Cause I think nowadays we really need to focus on that.
It helps so much. Or something that I also used to do is I would have themes for the month. Like the podcast would have themes around different types of things we would cover. And then I would create one freebie at the top of the month and I would include it in the show notes and mention it in every episode related to that theme. And, month over month, we'd have a different freebie. And I'm reminding
Ooh,
myself of
I
things that I
love
used to
that.
do that I need to
Yeah.
start doing again.
That's a gem because then you don't have to create a freebie every episode. I know Amy
Yep.
Porterfield used to always have a freebie like every episode. And I tried to do that and I'm like, I'm tired.
It's a lot. It's a lot.
It's a
So just
lot.
doing one a month
Just
is
doing
a
one a
lot
month.
easier.
I love that. See, these are gems. Gems are being dropped. All right, now let's jump into the lightning round. Are you ready?
Okay, I'm ready.
Okay. Number one, what is a resource that has really helped you in your first year in business so far that you can share with the Side Hustle Pro audience?
Ooh, a resource that has helped me, I would say the book Profit First really helped me get
Mm-hmm.
my business finances in order
Yeah.
and really changed how I was able to manage money in my business. So great book.
Okay. Number two, who is a fellow Black woman entrepreneur who you'd want to switch places with for a day and why?
Ooh, I would probably say Issa Rae because I think she has just done such a great job at creating an ecosystem of businesses.
Mm-hmm.
And I just want to get in there, see what all her systems are, and see how she makes it all connect together.
Do you have any non-celebrity ones?
Yeah, another entrepreneur who I also look up to a lot, who is more in the creator entrepreneur space, I think would be Mariana Hewitt. I think that she's created a really interesting brand with Summer Fridays and how Summer Fridays
Mm-hmm.
is such a standalone brand. Even though she's a massive influencer, it's such a
Mm-hmm.
great standalone brand that doesn't even really need her,
Yeah.
but integrates with her content so beautifully. And so kind of in my next phase, when I hopefully move into more of like a founder space as opposed to a creator space, I would love to create something similar.
I love that. Yes, you're right. That definitely stands alone. Number three, balanced Black girl. What is a non-negotiable part of your day these days?
Movement. And I'm so annoying. I'm so annoying when I
No,
talk about
I'm like,
working
you
out.
definitely have to have an answer to this. Okay.
Yes, I have to exercise. And so many
Hmm.
times I don't want to, I don't feel like it. I took a
Yeah.
Pilates class this morning, complaining the whole time, didn't want to do it, but like I have to do it. That
Yeah.
consistency, that discipline that exercise has given
Yes.
me is the reason why I'm able to do what I do. It is the reason why I'm able to have the confidence to get on the mic and to get on camera and to
Mm.
be as disciplined as you have to be with content. I learned that
Yeah.
discipline from fitness. It's just a
Hmm.
non-negotiable.
You're so inspiring. I'm going to get there.
Yes.
I'm going to get back there. Okay.
Yes.
Number four, what is a personal trait that has really helped you on this entrepreneurial journey?
I think similarly, I'm somebody who is just very disciplined. If I say I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it. If I make a commitment to
Yeah.
myself, I do it
Yeah.
almost to a fault sometimes, but I,
Mm.
I follow through very much so.
And then finally, what is your parting advice for fellow side hustlers who want to become their own boss, but are scared of losing a steady paycheck?
Understand what security means to you and do everything you can to give it to yourself. Put the systems in place to have the security that you want to feel and understand that like nothing is secure. I've also had experiences where I've been laid off from jobs and have a job today and don't have one tomorrow.
Yeah.
But there are ways that you can create a steady paycheck for yourself. So understand what security means to you and
Mhm.
put systems in place to make it so.
As you said on that episode, make a shake. Know
Yeah.
that you're going to make something shake.
And that's such a big part of it is like
Right.
it's not about knowing that everything is going to work out because you can never
Hmm.
guarantee it. But do you trust yourself
Yeah.
enough to know that you're going to make something shake regardless? Do you trust yourself enough to know that you're going to figure something out and land on your feet? That's all you need.
Yes. Yes. And that's it right there. I'm so glad we brought that up. because I love that part of that episode too. Y'all, I'm going to link to this episode. It was an incredible episode. Okay. And I think that is a key thing that all of us have that have gone into this entrepreneurial space. We trust ourselves. You have to trust whoever, whatever higher power you believe in, but also trust that you are going to figure this out. All right, y'all?
Yeah, you got to have that dog in you to make things happen.
So where can people connect with you and Balanced Black Girl after this episode?
Yes, so you can listen to Balanced Black Girl wherever you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, YouTube. We have new episodes every Tuesday. You can connect with me on Instagram and on TikTok at Balanced Less.
All right, guys. And there you have it. I'll talk to you next week. Hey guys, thanks for listening to Side Hustle Pro. If you like the show, be sure to subscribe, rate, and review on Apple Podcasts. It helps other side hustlers just like you to find the show. And if you want to hear more from me, you can follow me on Instagram at Side Hustle Pro. Plus, sign up for my 6-bullet Saturday newsletter at sidehustlepro.co/newsletter. When you sign up, you will receive weekly nuggets from me, including what I'm up to, personal lessons, and my business tip of the week. Again, that's sidehustlepro.co/newsletter to sign up. Talk to you soon.